denigrated and sneered at, hence the Simon Sharma reference which Alex made early on. And you know, I mean, the naked truth is that the 0.1% of the people in this country call the shots. You know, I've got a figure today off a reliable economist who says that the £200 billion in the City of London is owned by less than 200 people. That's 0.1% of the population, with the majority of this country's wealth. Now, these are the people who insist that their ideas, their way of looking at the world, dominate. So they repeat these dogmas, these mantras, like that if you tax the rich less, the wealth they'll invest and wealth will trickle down to everybody else. The evidence shows exactly the opposite, that wealth is being sucked up by austerity into that tiny percentage. In that sense, Gove's ideology is part of that sort of regressive, you know, it's like an old person, before they die, they start telling you about what it was like when they were a kid, I'm told. Right? It was a lot better than it is now, I'll tell you. But you know, it's the same thing. The ideology that Gove espouses is what we see in Dickens's novel about hard times. You know, he's often likened to Thomas Gradgrind, who says that kids need to learn facts, facts, facts. They need to be sat at a desk. They need to be disciplined, you know. And that regression in ideology is in the system as a whole, and it's the hallmark of Gove's operation. Now, with that image, it's a terrifying image for our kids and for our future, all right? Because the idea that you should cram kids with facts and then test them rigorously time and time again to try and get the best out of them is so much rejected that it's untrue. And it's failing kids at every level. I was reading today a report from somebody called John Cridland, who writes education for the CBI. He's extremely critical as a businessman of the education system that we've got. Why? Because it's not producing people who business can make money out of. It's not producing people with a broad array of skills, with a flexible intellect, who can solve problems, who feel confident in themselves. It's producing the opposite, because what Gove wants, he wants a working class which is submissive and which increasingly knows their place. And I came across this quote, which is about this kind of education for submission, because one of the other things that Gove wants to do in order to break the unions, he wants to introduce performance-related pay. Now, performance-related pay can be decided in a number of ways. It can be decided by feedback from parents, feedback from students, class observations of teachers, but above all, it's prefaced by looking at the results that the kids who you teach get. Now, if we go back to a system where all the judgment is made on the qualification that somebody gets, it actually destroys education and the whole intent of education, the whole thing that it's about. Because it means that teachers will increasingly teach to the test. Now, I teach in an FE college, I teach A-level history. And one of the, you know, I don't just make this up, but I can tell you that standards of literacy are deteriorating. That young people, 16 years old, it's as if they don't care what they write, in all honesty. It's as if they've been writing to somebody as a technical exercise, not as a way of communicating what they actually think, what they feel, and what they care about. But this, despite the evidence of that deterioration, Gove and his ilk want to carry on with this same way of operating, which I think is doing a whole lot of damage. Now, performance-related pay was rejected back in the 1950s. I just want to quote you from a book which was written actually in 1923 against the idea of continual testing and against the idea of judging education on how people pass tests. Because this guy's called Edmund Holmes, he was a Victorian inspector of schools, and he left the school system because he was so disgusted by it. It wasn't delivering education for the kids at all. And remember, the focus then was on testing, testing, testing. And this is what he wrote. He says, the natural result of this perpetual examination is that the pupils, instead of learning to rely on themselves, and to use their own powers and resources become more and more helpless and resourceless. If you turn a teacher into a marionette, a puppeteer, he must turn his pupils into marionettes, or he will not be able to respond to the strings which control his movements. And to be honest, that is exactly where, if you're in teaching, that is how you feel. You're set an impossible task, and then you're prevented from actually tackling the task by the people who stand above you, by budget cuts, etc., etc., etc. So I think that in terms of his own system that he wants to achieve, Gov is an absolute failure. And what it means is that instead of having a revision of education based on evidence and good practice, which is where the teaching profession and the student body want it to go, instead it's being shoehorned or trying to be beaten into shape by an ideology which is essentially out of date. Now I teach history, so I'm going to not go on about the things that Simon Sharma related to. But you know, the idea of a history syllabus which emphasises kings and queens and all the good things about the British Empire, if you can find them, all the stuff about heroic myths, you know, the great and the good, they're all men by the way, I'm afraid, but you know, all that kind of Our Island story, which he has actually said that he wants to base our history curriculum on, that idea is to get people to submit. You know, it's to submit, not to be empowered, it's to give in. Now when you think about this, the life that our students face, what they face is a world, very often while what they're taught is largely irrelevant to them. You put yourself in the shoes of a 16, 17-year-old student being taught about economics. Now I've read the edXL and the Aqua syllabus on economics and business studies, and it is simple neoliberal economics. So apparently the crisis that we're going through isn't really happening because it's not in the bloody textbook. It can't be happening. So the kids ask questions, and this is what education's about. Education is not about indoctrination, it's not about domestication, it's subversive, because if the next generation can't go past the current generation, we're actually going to go bloody backwards. That's the problem, and that's where Gove is taking us. He's backward ideologically, and he's backward in that sense. Now I want to finish off with this. Humanity is beset by problems which are undeniable. The system that we live in economically is in crisis. Cameron has said we face decades of austerity. He can't see a way out of it. And yet, wealth gushes up to the top, and people at the bottom are just left. You know, all the most brutal measures, the bedroom tax and all that, which people don't understand when we're in a wealthy economy. That is what we have to live with. Look at the environment. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, the environment was the weather was a lot better than it is today. But it's funny weather, isn't it? You know, I've never seen floods like we get now. Something's wrong with our climate. And you don't have to be a scientist to see that that's the truth. We want to address that. We don't just want blind economic growth. We want to be able to look at how we can sustain the economy and have an environmentally, sustained economy at the same time. The other big thing that we get is war, and I just do quickly want to talk about York College, because it was last November when the Israeli bombardment of Palestine happened. The kids were discussing in the corridor about why is it that when this obvious, gross act against human rights is taking place, why does the BBC take the side of the Israelis? That's what they started talking about. Now, then they got into a more developed discussion. They came into the history class, we had a discussion about it. Then they went off and organised a Stop the War group, a very successful one. They took a bus down to the Drown the Drones demonstration in Lincolnshire. Young people are thirsty for ideas, thirsty for education, they want to engage with it, and they understand that education, knowledge, understanding the world helps you to change it. Now, I don't have an answer it'd be arrogant to sort of say that I've got an answer in sort of 1 minute. I haven't. But I do know that the point of education is to make the world a better place. It's to actually empower people. And that is a democratic impetus. You know, those students who queued up in Nick Clegg's Sheffield constituency to vote, only to be cheated, they're denied democracy. We have a democratic deficit. And education is there to help you get that democratic deficit back. Now, I think that what's great about the current time is that teachers, including head teachers, are politically very, very critical of the system that we're in. There is a thirst for a discussion about education, which is very, very real. I think also we need more collective decision making. My ideal is not seeing kids sat at a desk working away on an exam paper while the clock ticks and they're frightened to death or whatever it is about failure. I like to see it best when people are discussing things, when we're sharing problems, when we say, you know, I don't know, maybe you know, you probably know better than I do. You know, you're different from me. How do you see it? This is the key to education, and that's why I think we've got an excellent chance of driving Gov back. And the last thing is, I just want to finish up with this. We need a new set of concepts about education, a new language about education. I completely support Alex and what everybody else on the platform has said. I think the People's Assembly is really important. What I'd like to see is a People's Manifesto for Education, the broad principles, the broad premises of an education system which will stop Gov dead. I have to say that for educated people, as you know, the teachers' unions are made up of teachers, that might come as a surprise to you. It shouldn't be beyond us, as people with an education, to say what we're bloody well for, and to say why he's the irrelevant bloody pipsqueak that he is.